Hey everybody, how are you? Welcome to our fifth and final chapter in our quilt along for the Checkered Stars. So I'm Reva with Quality Sewing and Vacuum, and I'm so glad that you are here. Today we are going to look at binding, putting binding on our quilt. So not hard, it's going to be really fun, but we're going to talk about a couple of different things about binding, but mostly just how to put it on to our quilt here. Now you can do binding in a whole bunch of different widths. We're going to concentrate on kind of the standard width, or what I know as the standard width, and so that's what we're going to go with. Now, if you are doing a project like like what we're working on, and it's square, you don't have to do your binding on bias. What is bias, you ask? Well, funny you should ask. Let's look at that. So this fabric here, take a look at the overhead shot. This fabric, here is my fold, and here, let's do it this way so you can see, here is the selvage. So this comes off the bolt this way, and it's just a piece that's been cut, okay? So very, very easy. I'm going to have you back it up the camera just a smidgy, just so we can get, there we go, got everything in there. So this is just a, I don't know, that much by the width of fabric. See, this opens up with the fabric. So this stripe actually goes with the lengthwise grain. So if you look at this, if you cut strips like this is actually going to be really cute on a quilt because it's going to have the little stripies for your binding. So if this is our quilt and you were to put that on there, it would have the stripes going that way. Really cool. One thing to know about straight of grain binding is that it's very stable and it doesn't have a lot of flexibility. So it's fine if you're doing a square quilt, a square table, something with square corners that turns a 90-degree, you're fine with doing straight of grain. Now, if you are doing something with curves, well actually let's start with this. We're going to start with making some of this, and I'm going to compare the two together. So if I want to cut my fabric and I'm going to create my my strips for my binding, I'm going to fold this up, and this is generally how I cut fabric at home too, is I take the fold and I make sure that it's parallel. And remember, in week 1 you're going to see how to make sure that your fabric is square. Remember, we talked about that. So I'm just going to go ahead and trim off this little extra little whisper of fabric so I have a nice straight edge right here. And then I'm going to cut a couple of strips that are 2.5 inches wide. This is kind of my go-to width of binding, and of course you can do whatever it is that you want. And so when you figure out your binding, which we have in our notes for this month, it talks about how you figure out your binding, and we'll talk about that too. Well, we may as well talk about it right now, right? How about we do that? So when you are wanting to figure out how much binding you need to take your quilt, and this is just that table runner we worked on last week, but you want to figure out how wide it is from left to right and how far it is across the end. And then you're going to multiply that by 2 and probably add at least 12 inches to that. So if I have a piece that's, let's say, 24 inches by 12 inches, right? That's a total of 36 inches. So 12 across the top and 24 down, that would be 36 inches. So 2 times 36 is 72, and if I added another 12 inches to that, it'd be 84 inches, and that's how much binding strips that you need. Now you would take the 84 and divide that by 45, because there's, I'm sorry, let's do 40, because with selvages and stuff you never really get the full width of fabric, and it's usually around 42, but we'll take that off. I don't know why I said 45, I guess I was hopeful, but let's say 40, and we need 84 inches, and I only have 40 inches to work with on one of these strips, so that means I would need 3 strips of fabric cut. Okay? Does that make sense? So in your handout I did some really kind of remedial hopefully math stuff. But anyway, now let's talk about getting this put together. Let me grab my pins. So what you're going to do is you're going to take your strips and you're going to put them one right side up, and we're going to stitch them together. Now, let me turn this around so you can see the selvage a little bit better. You really don't want the selvage in your binding, because that would be really quite unattractive. So I'm going to go ahead and take this second piece, and I'm going to lay my edge inside of that. I'm not going to come all the way to the edge because then my selvage would be included. So I'm just going to do a little crisscross here and line those up. So and I'll even move it in a little bit so you can see. I'm going to line it up so that way I know that I don't have any selvage either this way or this way. Okay? And then we're going to stitch it together, and we're going to stitch it from the corner here to the corner here. I usually do let my binding, when I'm sewing them together, hang out so I can actually aim specifically for starting right in that little crook right there and stitching across and ending there. So I'm just going to put a couple of pins in this. So now, as a review, in month 1 or week 1, not month 1, week 1, we did fabric prep, and we talked about basic quilting or piecing suggestions. And then in week 2, we did our triangle piecing, and we made the stars. In week 3, we put our sashings and our borders on, and in week 4 we talked about putting the sandwich together and getting it quilted up. So here we are at 5, and we are ready to do the binding. So that's what we're working on right now. And of course, if you want to go take a look at what we have done, you can go to our Facebook page, our YouTube channel or our Facebook page, and just search Quality Sewing. You can see lots of videos that we have up there. But also, you could take a look for everyone who's put in a hashtag at quality. QA, what do we name it, Carrie? I can't even remember now. There we go, QSV Quilt Along. So Quality Sewing Vacuum Quilt Along. Okay, so I have my my machine set up with the needle in the center needle position, and I'm just going to lower it down, and then I'm going to take that little crook right there and slip it right up to the needle. Then I'm going to line up the other end so that the opposite crook is right here on my center needle position with that diagonal seam tape that we've put on the machine. Okay, so now I'm just going to stitch across, keeping my that area right on that line. Let me take that pin out because I don't want to get run over. Now, a very important thing to do, which I did successfully today, which I don't always, is I stitched the correct direction. Because here's the cool thing, when we open this up now, it's one continuous piece, which we love. Sometimes I'll not be paying attention and I might go this way and then it just doesn't work. So then that's your opportunity to get to use your seam ripper. Isn't that fun? Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to trim off my my fabric. So you can come in here and just cut your 1/4 inch seam allowance and then come back and trim, but I'm kind of frugal with my time. I usually just trim up that way and come across, and then at the end I'm just going to cut off that piece just so I have one continuous piece of a scrappy fabric. Okay, so now we have this all ready to go. So now we want to press it. So let's get our press mat and we'll get our iron. And what you're going to do is just set that seam just like we've done before. Remember when we pressed our blocks? And then just roll that backward and press. We don't want to necessarily iron, we're just pressing. Okay, so now we have a nice smooth thing. I needed to get the condensation out of my hose and I did not. Okay, so now that we have a nice long piece of binding, what you're going to do, there's a couple different things you can do. You could use a binding attachment or a binding foot that will turn the fabric for you. That's not what we're doing here today. We are using regular straight binding. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and fold this in half, and then I'm going to press it. So let me get it started here. And it doesn't take long to press your binding. So we're just going to fold it along. And one reason why we chose to do that, that diagonal seam to join is because that way when you're wrapping that around your quilt, around the edge of your quilt, you don't have, let me show you right here, see how the seam is going this way? If it was straight up and down, it would be 3 layers on 3 layers on 3 hours. This 3 layers, this distributes that bulk, so it's not all in the same exact spot. So it's going to make your life easier. Okay, so now I'm halfway done, and we're getting there. So you're just going to continue pressing the whole thing, and if you're on your bigger ironing surface, it goes a lot faster because you actually have a larger area that you can press out. Okay, we're almost there. Okay, so now this is, remember, the straight of grain binding. So this is really easy to work with, works really good about going around straight corners, right, around square corners, and straight, long straights. So let's talk next about what we're going to do with bias binding, and we'll talk about bias. So now when you have your long strip, because you've cut 4 of these, right, to go around your table runner, or whatever. You have a lot more if you've done the quilt. But you've got all this, you don't want it getting in knots. So you can do things like fan fold it, and I've just rolled this up just really loosely, so I have my binding all nice and gathered. This is straight of grain, this is not bias on this one, but you can also do this is a really, oh, you're gonna love it. This is an amazing tool. You might have one every once in a while, I don't know, but this works out really well too, because what you can do is just take your binding, and I usually will actually do this when it's flat before I've pressed it, but you can get it all ready to go and just roll it up. And this helps keep everything really nice and flat so it doesn't get creased, you don't have wrinkles in it, and then it also is really easy to roll off of your you know, it just delivers really nice as you're using it, it just spools off. So this is really a cool way to do this. Now, you know, so these are really hard to come by. I don't know if you can find one of these things. So anyway, but that's just a cool way to do it. Now, let's talk about the challenges with using a straight of grain binding, which I do like doing straight of grain. So if I'm using this, it's going to be perfect to go around my square corners, right? Because remember, it doesn't stretch. But if I'm stitching it to a round item, look what it does. It doesn't want to lay flat because it's straight and it has no stretch. So if you're doing anything with any type of curve, which this is bonus because that's not what we're working with today, we're working with straight and corners, but if you need to do something with a curve, or if you want it to look a little different, then you're going to want to consider using, you know, bias. So let's talk about what bias is. So if you remember, this fabric was just right off the bolt. The lines are straight, right? Okay, so if you take a look at this piece, this is just a 12, I think 12 and a half, let's see, 12 and a half by 12 and a half piece of fabric. If you take a look, this was the length of grain, right? It's very straight, very firm. The cross grain, which is the selvage to selvage, has a little bit of give to it, but the part of fabric that has the most give is called the bias. And that's where the threads that go this way and the threads that go this way intersect. They make a really stretchy part. Look at how much more that stretches. So our goal for that, to make our bias on, to create our bias, is to take advantage of that. So I'll just use a regular pen for this because it doesn't matter, because we're going to cut on it. But what I'm going to do is I am going to just draw a line from corner to corner. Now you can, you don't have to do this because you can just cut it, but I'm just going to show you where our bias is. And again, this is just a regular ballpoint pen, and it doesn't matter because that's our cut line. Okay, so I'm just going to cut that, and that's going to give us the two pieces that are, it's going to expose edges on the bias. So let's go ahead and cut that. And there's one piece, and here's my other piece. Now, what we're going to do with this is we're going to stitch them back together, but so that the bias is in here. So when we open it up, we're going to end up with bias. You'll see. It's really cool. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually stitch these together, and I'm maneuvering it so I have it at about 1/4 inch, a little peak hanging over on 1/4 inch on each side. Okay, so let's go ahead and put a pin in that, because I know my capabilities and I'm really good at getting myself off where I want to sew. So I'm just going to make sure they're all together. And this is straight of grain here, so we're not having to worry about it stretching out of place too much. But anytime you work with actually stitching on a bias edge, remember that's where we want to be really super careful. Okay, so I'm going to come back over here, and that would be, we talked a lot about the stretch of the grain in our week 2 when we did our diagonal, we did our triangles. Okay, let me put down my foot, and I'm just going to stitch this at 1/4 inch. And I need my pin cushion, don't I, to get rid of my pins. So let's just stitch this together. And then when we press this, you can press them with both seams going one way, so all to one side, or you can press them open, which is actually kind of a nice thing too, to just press the seams open. Okay. All right, so we've got that one finished, so let's cut our thread and let's get our pressing mat back up here. And we're going to go ahead and press this. And remember, first thing we want to do is go ahead and press it and get that seam set. And then we're going to press, I'm going to press it one way just to get it going. And then I'm going to open up my other seam. So I'm just going to do a real quick little press there to get that set one direction. Then we'll come back, and I'm just going to open him up and open up the seam, and we'll do it. Press him open. Okay. All right. So now we have our piece of fabric that, if you notice, now is kind of like a parallelogram. Right? So we have, this is all on bias, and so this is what we want to look at. Now, if you're wondering how much bias strips of binding that you need, you can check out our website at qualitysewing.com and then take a look at the top. It will say inspirations, and you click on that and it will say binding calculator. We've actually put that up there for you, and so then you can know how many yards you need to make it happen. And it will do straight of grain, and it also does bias. So now I work with 2.5 inch strips is what I prefer to cut my binding at. Remember, we already talked about that, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to line up my 2.5 inch edge along, let me get him straightened up, along the line on the ruler, and then I'm going to take that fancy dancy pin that I've now lost. There it is. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and draw that 2.5 inch strip. Then I'm going to line my 2.5 inch mark on my ruler up to the marking that I put on the fabric, and I'm trying to get it so I can have I'm using an 18-inch ruler here today, which works fine for this. You'd want to use probably a longer if you're working with a bigger piece, and I boo-booed, but that's okay because that'll be in seam allowance. But what I was doing is I'm trying to make sure that he lines up and that I can get my ruler hanging off both ends. So let me get him lined up there and lined up there. Perfect. And then actually, let's just cut him now. We'll wait. I'm just going to draw him, and then we will cut that in a minute. Okay, so here's our our fabric. Okay, so we're all ready to go there. I've got 1, 2, 3 strips that I'm going to make out of this one. Okay, and you might be actually surprised at how much binding you can get out of a rectangle of a certain size. So take a look at the calculator for that. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to sew these ends together. Okay, but what we're not going to do is sew the ends together with the ends together, the edges. We need to offset because this strip needs to come and hook to this. So this end needs to come and hook to this one, and this one hook to this one, so that way it's continuous. Okay, so let's fold this up, and this is where it gets, you got to hold your tongue right, because it's not going to want to, it doesn't want to do it, right? It doesn't want to play. So also, and let's get in really, can you get in zoom, zoom, zoom? Zoom, 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 zoom. Okay, so also, where this mark comes out and this mark comes out, you're not going to mark the ends of the mark. Let me show you where we're going to mark, where we're going to do it. I am going to come and I'm going to just take my pen and I'm going to mark at a 1/4 inch. Because that way you'll see where the intersection point needs to be. And I didn't need to draw it across the whole thing, but I did anyway. Okay, so this one, and then we'll take this one and put that at a 1/4 inch. And this one I'll just mark at the heads of those lines. Okay, so remember we're going to take this and put here. So when we fold this up, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a pin and I'm going to stick it in one side, okay? And I want it to come out that intersection right there. Can you see? There we go. And then I'm going to stick it into that mark right there. Okay, so now those two are matched up, and let me align the stitched line and pin them into place. Then I'll go to this one and I'm going to take my 1/4 inch mark and stick it into the 1/4 inch mark on that line. Okay, and then again we're going to straighten it up, and then we will pin them together. Okay, so then this is a good way, especially if you're doing a lot of binding, it's a good way to just verify that you've got everything in the right place. And if it's off a little bit, which mine is tending to be right now, you know what? Not going to care. I'm not going to care. I'm just going to stitch it and we'll just deal with it. It'll be okay. Okay, so now I've got him pinned, and I'll put a pin in the middle of each one of these spansions, and then we'll clip them together with our needle and thread. We'll stitch them up. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is just take and I'm going to stitch from one side, and I don't need to stitch all the way out here because my fabric actually is starting right there. So that's where the seam needs to start. So I'll put my foot down, and I'm a little bit too far over, so let me come over here. There we go. And let's see if we can get that going. And then I'll just stitch the seam up. Okay, let's take that pin out before we run over it. Always a good idea to take a pin out before you run over it. Bad idea to take it out after or have it hit. That's what I'm really saying. Okay, so now that we've got it going, I can probably go ahead and take this pin out because I've got him kind of hung together here. All right, and so then I have one pin left. Whoops, my seam allowance started to flip under, so get him under control there. Okay, so now we have our little guy stitched together in this really weird tube. So now what we're going to do, I'm going to turn it right side out. Well, actually, let's see if we can press this. Let's see if we can press this seam open real quick so it's nice and flat. And like the other one. Okay, so now if you're doing this on something small like this piece, try not to press in the the folds, so you press those down and crease them. Okay, so now I'm going to turn it right side out because I drew on the right side. So maybe I should have drawn on the wrong side, then you could have seen it even better. But you can see that we did pretty good here, lining that up. Look, our line goes right through our seam, so we did really pretty good there. So we're going to go ahead and start cutting this, and we're going to just cut on that line, okay? And then as we go, you're going to be able to get one continuous piece. Now we're talking about making our strips and having these be on the bias so they have a little bit of stretch to them. But look at how the stripes are going now at a diagonal. And that could be even more fun for your project, is to have your stripes go at an angle, your check go at an angle. So that's another reason to do that. Now some people like to just use bias all the time. They don't want to use straighted grain, and that's fine. You can use bias for doing straight right corners. It's just straighted grain you really don't want to use for rounded corners, okay? So bias can do everything. Straight of grain really can only do straight corners. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, so really quick and easy, and this was a 12 and a half by 12 inch square that we started with. So let's see how much binding we ended up with just with that little piece of fabric. Okay, so I've got that trimmed off, and I'm just going to cut that off, and that's what we have left over. It's all good. So let's see how much we have here. So let's say there's 20 inches, 40 inches. We have 50 inches of binding just from our 12 and a half inch square. That's pretty good. So then we're going to do the same thing here. We're just going to press him in half. Now, when you're pressing your bias, try to be gentle with it. We don't want to pull the bias, because remember, he stretches. So as you're pressing, just fold it over and let it sit there, because when we iron things, we tend to want to grab onto it and pull it a bit. You know, try to stay away from doing that. And I'm going to give it a little extra seam right there. There's an intersection of a bunch of seams right there. But that's okay. That's what you get when you do bias. So anyway, this is just a really a nice fast way to do bias, is to do it this way instead of cutting. Could you imagine cutting a bunch of rectangular diagonal pieces of fabric and then sewing them each one together? That would take longer to do. So this is a much more efficient way to do it. Okay, but there's a million ways to do everything, so you do whatever makes you happy there. Okay, so there's my binding. Now, let's talk about our binding. Now, we're going to take a look at this guy real quick, because remember how the straight of grain, when we tried to go around a corner, he didn't want to do it. He wants to, he wanted to kind of, if we do this, if we try to get him to go around, he doesn't want to. He's kind of square. So with the bias, when you're going around a curve, if you give it a little pull, it naturally kind of wants to fold. So it will more easily work around a corner and be able to fold in. Okay, so that's good. We're going to keep working with our just our bias piece here. So if this is our quilt, you can choose to zigzag around the edges of your quilt if you want to. I actually serged mine. So I put a serged edge on the edge here, and the reason I did that is it keeps all the layers together and keeps them flat. Now let's take a look at my runner really fast before, I don't think I need this for a little bit now, because I want to show you something on here. So let's talk about when you're all done with your quilting and you have the full sandwich. Remember, you're going to have the extra fabric out here past your project. So you're going to want to trim that off. So now the easiest way to do that I like using my rotary cutter because that's the easiest for me. But what you want to do is look at the width of your border, of your binding. This border's narrow, so a narrow ruler like this works. If I was using a wider piece, then I would use like my 6-inch or my 8.5-inch ruler, and I'd measure from that. So what I've got here is 2 3/4 from the edge to the seam on that fabric there. So what I'm going to do is take my rotary cutter and I'm going to just cut off the fabric at that, and you can even see, remember we pieced our batting together last time, didn't we? Okay, so I'm just going to get this lined up, and then we're going to chop off the rest of it. So then what I did is, after I had all the edges done, I took it to the serger and I just did a clean finish on the edge just to keep them together so they were more compact. Now if you're using a fluffy batting, like a poly that's really fluffy, you really might need to do that to help control those. So now we're going to move on from our bigger piece to our smaller piece here, because it's going to be easier for us to get around quickly so I can show you. Okay, things I'm going to need: quilt clips or pins, and then also I really like to work with my Quilter Select glue stick. That is really something I really like to use when I'm doing binding. So now when you start working with your project, you want to start midway on a side. The last place you want to start is in a corner, because there's no way. A corner should be continuous, and there's no way to be continuous if you start there, right? That's a start or end. So I'm just going to walk this around really fast just to make sure that my seam did not end up right in the very center, and it did not, so we're okay there. So I'm going to actually give myself a little bit more play here, and I'm going to come up here and I'm going to start right here. I'm going to leave myself a nice long piece to work with, and I'm going to come in here and let me put a pin in where I'm going to start, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch down, and I want to stop a 1/4 inch shy of our piece. So, and just for example purposes here, let me just mark that on the fabric real quick so you can see. So I'm lining up my 1/4 inch along the edge of my quilt, and I'm just going to mark a line on the binding right there. That's a 1/4 inch, and you can do that too, just don't use a ballpoint pen. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and I am going to stitch. Now I have it on a straight stitch, and I'm going to actually lengthen mine to a longer length because I put fusible thread in the bobbin, which is really going to be cool. You're going to like what that does here in a minute. Now remember, don't give a tug on this because then it stretches really, really easy. So I'm just going to come in here and put my foot down, and with this foot and this machine having my needle in the center position and using this foot, I can turn a nice corner, and that just gives me another thing to think about. It's actually not, it's 3/8. On this particular foot, I need to be 3/8, not a 1/4. I need to stop a little bit shorter. So I'm going to redraw that line really quick. Okay, so 3/8. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to stitch until I get to that 3/8 mark, which the actual mark on the fabric is not the actual one because I saw where it was. Don't worry. Okay, so I just did a little back stitch there, and then I'm going to cut my thread. Now we're going to come back over to our overhead magic cam. And here's my seam right here, right? And what you want to do when you're testing this is just make sure that when you turn this and turn it to the back, that it covers up the stitched line. Okay, you don't want to have a huge excess, and you don't want it so short that it doesn't cover. So 3/8 of an inch on this one is perfect. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to turn this up so that this line is straight. Okay, then what you want to do is come back down, making sure the fold, everything is sitting right on top. So let's zoom in a little bit because I want to show you the difference between yes and no. Okay, so see how it's right in line? What we want to make sure we don't do is have it too much over, so we have a little extra, or we have too little. Okay, see how you have some sticking out there of the quilt? You don't want that. You want to make sure that everything is right in line. And take a look right here. See how that's sticking out right there? That's because I didn't turn it correctly. So let's make sure we get all those things lined up. So what you're going to want to make sure is that this is lined up here, this is lined up here, and that these are lined up right here. And with that being said, you should be able to just keep stitching. Put them in this way so it's out of the way. And what we're going to do is we're going to start stitching right at that intersection. It'll be 3/8 down and 3/8 over. So let me give myself a little mark right here. And then it's 3/8 of an inch down, so I'll come here. And you definitely don't have to mark it like this. I'm doing that just so you understand where we're starting. Once you do it a few times, you're going to be perfectly fine. And if you want to, take some of the diagonal seam tape that we have on the bed of the machine here, and you can run some off to the side so you know right where to start and stop. So I'm just going to go ahead and start right here, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm looking for that dot, and I'm going to put my needle down in it, and then I'm going to just start to sew. And I'm going to do the same thing to get to the next spot. Now I could very easily, or maybe I should have gone ahead and back stitched there, but I did not do that. Oops, I was not paying attention to myself and I went way crooked. That's why I think sometimes I look like I've been drinking. So anyway, really crooked. So I'm just going to start again, and I will back stitch this time. And this time I'm just going to run nice and straight. It's not really hard, but you know, you got to pay attention too. Okay, so now I'm coming down to the end here, and I want to stop at that same 3/8 of an inch. So now I'm going to back tack a little bit and cut my thread, and then we're just going to go ahead and do the same thing. I'm going to flip it up and flip it down, making sure that everything is lined up. Okay, and then we're going to start stitching right in that spot. And okay, then we're going to come around, and then we're going to do this last corner here, and then we will finish it off. I'll show you how. Well, there's 2 more corners, this corner and the next corner to do, because you know what, I guess there's 4 corners to make a square, so we're getting close. Okay, so let me stop right there. Okay, and then we'll do this corner, and then we'll do the next one, then I'll show you how to join it. So again, just flip it back and flip it down on itself, making sure all the things that we need are lined up. Okay, now, since I am using that fusible thread, I have my stitch length on a 3. It's a little bit longer, but that's okay. But it's just longer so that way there's more thread floating on the top. So I will show you that in a second. Last corner, backwards. My foot control got stuck under the cabinet there. Okay, there we go. Okay, does that ever happen to you? Your foot control gets stuck underneath something? Oh, look. Okay, look at what happened. Hey, let's go to that back one. It will be better. Okay, so look. It's hanging out. Look, it's too far. I stitched too far in. So get my friend, get my unstitcher, and let's unstitch a couple of stitches there because it just went too far. There we go. Okay, so now, remember we want to fold it so the line, the edge is in line with each other, so that taking that stitch out helped. And then we'll bend it back down. And then I'm going to go just a couple of inches, and I'm going to then join up the other our other piece. Okay, we'll join our edges. So I'm going to go ahead and just stitch a little bit here and then reverse and lock it in, and now we'll cut. Now we're going to come over here and let's take a look at our piece. So I have a lot more fabric here than what I need, but what I need to do is get this all fixed, you know, because we need to join these two together. Now I have a seam right here, so I'm going to cut that seam off because I don't need it in our fabric, so in our piece. So we'll use this as our guide. So let me trim him off because we got to get a diagonal edge anyway, right? Okay, so off he comes. We don't need that anymore. So what we need to do is match up this with this piece. This piece is too long. See how it's in too tight into the corner? I really need it about in here. So what I'm going to do is open that up. There's my bias, and this is so much easier to do if you have a bigger quilt. But I'm going to take an inch off of this piece, but that's still going to leave him at a diagonal. So inch, and the only thing that makes him difficult is he gets fiddly because he doesn't want to stay still because he's all crazy. Okay, so there's our little binding there. Now what we're going to do is we're going to match that up and we're going to stitch that on here. So what I'm going to do is lay this across. See him right there? Might be easier. Let me chop this off so you can see, because this is where it gets kind of fun. Okay, so this is my square piece. This is my angled piece, right? You would use, and I will use a fabric marker this time, not a ballpoint pen. Okay. Ooh. Oh, I think I just made it too short. Okay, we'll see. We'll see how that worked out. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is mark where these two intersect, right? Where that raw edge comes to. Okay, now if you're looking at this piece, you know that there's a 1/4 inch seam allowance there, right? Can we get closer? I think we need to get closer. There we go. So we're going to have a 1/4 inch seam allowance right here, right? And I made a mark right here on this edge, correct? So when I remove this, I need to add seam allowance for this piece and the seam allowance for that piece, which is basically a 1/2 inch. So I need to make a 1/2 inch piece from add 1/2 inch from that mark. Does that make sense? Because both pieces need a seam allowance. If I just added 1/4 of an inch, it would be stitching. Well, maybe that would work. No, if I cut it right there, then you'd have nothing to purchase it to. Okay, I'm confusing myself. Okay, so I'm going to unstitch this a little bit more because it's just so tight because it's such a short piece. I should have done a longer rectangle. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to open this up flat. Okay, and this is where I cut that too short, but live and learn. Okay, so now I am going to take this and I am going to lay him as flat as I can, take my ruler, and I'm going to put it at the 45-degree angle, which for this piece, I can look at how it's laying on the squares. You can also bring it up to the 45-degree line on the ruler and match that. So there's my line. Now I need to add a 1/2 inch to that. So now I'm putting that line that I just drew on my 1/2 inch line, and I'm coming across there. So there's my 1/2 inch that I added. And there are other tools like the binding tool. I really like that. It's TQM is the company that makes the bias binding tool, and it's a really quick and easy mitered binding tool. It's really cool. So now I have my 2 corners, and or pieces. I'm gonna open this one up a little bit because I need a little bit more space to work with because it's really tight. Okay. seam ripper is probably better than a whole big pair of scissors, but you know, working with what you got. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I want to put right sides together. So you've got to work with the same edge. So this edge needs to match with that edge. This edge matches with that edge. So you're going to do a Houdini little flippy flop, put them together, and you're going to have about a 1/4 inch hanging off, and then we're going to pin that, and then ideally on the other end you're going to have a similar looking situation, which we won't because I cut that too short because I was trying to go for simplicity, or I don't know, just the way it goes. But it's going to be inside, or it is what it is. This isn't the real quilt. Give yourself a next room. Okay, so then we're going to come and stitch that and give ourselves a 1/4 inch seam allowance there, and that will work out beautifully. So let's go ahead and stitch that. Take out that pin. And this again is a little bit fiddly just because of, you're not working in a very tight, very loose space. It's pretty tight. Okay, so now we have that, and if things work out and the planets align, look at that, it's the right length. So I'm not going to bother pressing that this time. Well, I guess I can. It's right there. Okay. And I didn't do it long enough to do any damage to the mat. I know that's what you're thinking. You didn't put the mat up there. No, I didn't. Okay, so now we're just going to close up our little hole, and then let's take a look at what we're going to do to turn those corners. Okay, got that closed up. And now we do need our pressing mat now. So now here's our corner. It's open and it's flopped. It's stitched to here, and we start back up here, and we're good to go. So now what we're going to do is turn this to the back. Turn this to the back. Now here's where this is really cool, because can you see the stitch? We can look at the, well, we're going to look here. You can see the little turquoise polka dots probably, hopefully, if we can get in. I don't know if we can get any tighter. Okay, so I made that stitch length longer so the bobbin thread was longer here. So there's going to be more for the iron to pick up, to purchase to. So we're going to go ahead, and I'm going to start by flipping it to the back side, and I'm going to put a pin on it. Okay, so we'll put a pin in it. Then I'm going to take this side and I'm going to wrap it around and put a pin in it. Okay, now what we're going to do is here in the corner, can you see how it wants to tuck in? Really nice there. So this one is under, so I'm going to roll that to the back, and I'm going to pin that part of my binding, and then I'm going to flip it over, and I want to make sure I get this on this side. So I pinned that piece. Now we can come in here and fold that over to get our bias piece on the back side as well. So now we have a mitered angle here and a mitered angle here. And then you would just continue around doing the same thing all the way around. Now we have this the fusible thread in the bobbin. So now these are glass head pins, so you can actually press them. If you're not using glass head pins, don't press them, because they will melt if they're plastic. It's not a good thing. So I'm just going to fuse that in place, and then we can work our way around and continue our whole piece. So you would just work around and do the same thing, and then when you take your pins out, your fabric is held, your binding is held in place. Okay, so that's really pretty cool. Now here's what it doesn't do for you. What it's not going to do for you is it's not going to hold it there permanently. So if you want to do it permanently, we still got to stitch it. So what we're going to do, so here's the corner that we did, is you're going to come along and you're going to stitch in the ditch on the front side, and then that will catch the back side. So I'm going to go ahead and take the fusible thread out of the machine now, and oh, let me show you what I did here. Can we go to the back view? I wrote fusible, that it's a fusible thread on the bobbin, so I know this is not just regular white thread, because what a sad waste of thread that would be. So I'm just going to put back in my matching turquoise bobbin, so that way you can see where it ends up. Now with the stitch in the ditch, I'm just going to use my eye as a guide. Now if you have a stitch in the ditch foot that has that flange right down the center, that's really an awesome foot to use. And then you're just going to guide it so your stitches go right down that seam line, and then when you get to the corner, you're going to stop in the corner using your needle down, and you're going to pivot and then keep stitching, and then you're going to do that around your whole piece. Now some people do like to hand bind their quilts, and this technique still works for that. So I'm going to go ahead and stop there. We'll go back to our little view here. So if you were doing hand binding, you would still put it on the same way we did here, but then you could sit in front of the TV and you can whip stitch this to the back. But you can see that I have my seam line right in the sections right there, right? It caught quite a bit on the back, but that's okay. But look, it doesn't even show really from the front, even though I used that bright turquoise thread. So pretty good, right? So you're just going to do that all the way around your whole quilt, and you're going to get it all put together, and then you're finished. So lots of fun. I hope that helps when you're binding your quilt or your table runner or whatever you've put together. And again, we love seeing your what you've been working on, so just hashtag QSV Quilt Along, and then we get to see your pictures as well, and then you can go look for other people's pictures too. But go ahead and also check out our Facebook and our YouTube channel under Quality Sewing, and then you're going to see a lot more content, and most of our content does live on that YouTube channel, so check us out there. And then join us every Tuesday at 10 a.m. Pacific, and you'll get to, we have a different topic every week, so we look forward to seeing you there. And thanks for joining us for our Quilt Along. I hope you had fun, and if you're just joining for the first day, go back and check out the other 4 classes that we did for doing the Quilt Along, and if you didn't see them, there are the PDFs that you can download so you can print out the synopsis on that. So anyway, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time.